to the other guests in the private dining room, to the sommelier refilling glasses with quiet precision, to the couple at the corner table celebrating what looked like an anniversary. I was just the woman pushing the linen cart down the hallway. Nobody looked twice at me. That was the point. I had been watching Judge Raymond Calloway for 11 days. He arrived at the Meridian Club every Thursday at 7:15. Always the same table, booth 4, near the window that looked out over Michigan Avenue. Always the same order, the dry-aged ribeye, medium rare, a glass of Barolo, and whatever his guest was having. Tonight his guest was his chief of staff, a man named Conrad Webb, who had worked beside him for 14 years, and who 3 weeks ago had started meeting privately with the Harmon family. The Harmons ran the West Side. Not in any official capacity. Not in any way a newspaper could print without a lawsuit. But everyone who worked the late shifts downtown knew the name. Knew what it meant when a city contract went to a company that didn't exist 6 months ago. Knew what it meant when a witness in a federal case quietly withdrew their testimony and moved to Phoenix. I knew what it meant because my father had been one of those witnesses. He'd been a mid-level accountant at a logistics firm on the South Side. He'd noticed things, wire transfers that didn't match invoices, shell companies cycling money through freight billing, a name that appeared too many times in the margins of documents that were supposed to be destroyed. He'd done what you're supposed to do. He called the federal tip line. He gave a statement. He trusted the process. 6 months later, he had a heart attack at 53, walking to his car in a parking garage on a Tuesday morning. The coroner said natural causes. My mother said he'd been perfectly healthy at his last physical. I said nothing, because I was 26 and terrified, and I didn't know yet what I know now. That was 4 years ago. My name is Serena Cole, and I am not actually a hotel employee. I am a licensed private investigator, and I have been hired by a federal prosecutor named Helen Marsh, who cannot officially conduct this surveillance herself, because Raymond Calloway sits on the 7th Circuit, and 2 of her colleagues have already been quietly reassigned after getting too close to cases that touched his courtroom. Helen needed someone off the books, someone patient, someone who had personal reasons to be thorough. She found me through a retired detective who knew my father's story. I had been building my file for 4 months before I ever set foot in the Meridian Club. Phone records obtained through legal channels, property records. A pattern of recusals that made no sense unless you knew which cases were being steered. But what I needed, what Helen needed, was something in real time. Something that could not be explained away in a courtroom. A conversation. A handoff. A moment of proof that connected Calloway directly to Webb's meetings with the Harmons. Tonight felt different. I couldn't explain it with data. It was something in the way Webb had walked in. Too quickly. Jacket not fully buttoned. The particular kind of energy a man carries when he is about to do something he cannot undo. I positioned the linen cart near the service corridor that ran alongside booth 4. There was a gap between the wall panels, roughly 2 inches, original to the building's 1920s construction and invisible unless you knew to look. I had found it on my 2nd visit. I had tested the acoustic quality on my 4th. I could hear everything said at booth 4 as clearly as if I were sitting across the table. I adjusted the small recorder in my jacket pocket and listened. Webb was talking first. His voice was low, but not panicked. Practiced. The voice of a man who had done this before. He's not going to wait past the 15th, Webb said. Vincent Harmon wants confirmation before the motion hearing. Either the case gets reassigned, or he pulls the financing on the campaign. All of it. Raymond, that's $2.3 million. I heard the judge set down his fork. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. I've given that family more than they understand, Calloway said. His voice was different from the one I'd heard in courtroom footage. Quieter, older. Tell Vincent I need another week. He gave you another week 3 weeks ago. Then tell him I need to think. Raymond. Webb's voice shifted. Something harder underneath it now. There is no more thinking. The Delacroix case gets reassigned to Martinez or everything comes out. Everything. The Palmetto contracts. The Miriam situation. All of it. Another silence. Longer this time. The Miriam situation, Calloway repeated very quietly. You would do that. I'm not doing anything. I'm telling you what Vincent will do. I'm telling you because I've spent 14 years protecting you from your own decisions, and I am tired, Raymond. I am genuinely tired. I was writing shorthand notes on the small pad I kept in my left hand, not because the recorder wasn't running, but because I needed to do something physical to keep my hands from shaking. The Miriam situation. I didn't know what that meant yet. I would find out. I was so focused on the conversation that I almost didn't notice the man who had stopped in the hallway behind me. He was standing about 10 feet away, near the entrance to the private dining alcove. Tall, dark suit, the particular stillness of someone who is trained to stand quietly and observe. He was looking at me, not at the linen cart, at me. His eyes moved to the gap in the wall panel, then back to my face. He had figured it out in approximately 4 seconds. I did not move. I did not reach for my phone, or look for an exit, or do any of the things that panic tells you to do. I held the notepad casually at my side and met his gaze and tried to read what was behind it. He was not hotel security. His jacket sat wrong for that. Too well cut, no earpiece, no radio. He was not with Webb. Webb had arrived alone. He was not Harmon family muscle, because Harmon family muscle did not have the kind of eyes that looked like they were doing math. He took 2 steps toward me. I prepared to tell him I was a contract laundry supervisor reviewing panel damage from a maintenance incident last week. He didn't give me the chance. He stopped close enough that his voice would not carry, looked directly at me, and said, very quietly, "Whatever you have on that recorder, it's not enough. There's a second man in the parking structure. He's been there since 6:45. If you leave through the main lobby in the next 20 minutes, you won't make it to your car." I stared at him. "Who are you?" I said. "Someone who has been watching Conrad Webb for longer than you have," he said, "and someone who cannot be the one to walk that recording out of this building. But you can." His name, I learned later, was Daniel Voss. He was a former DEA analyst who had been quietly building a parallel case on the Harmon organization for 2 years, operating without institutional backing after his supervisor was removed, following an internal complaint that Daniel believed was manufactured. He had identified Webb as a key link 6 months ago. He had been watching Calloway's Thursday dinners for 8 weeks. He had noticed me on my 3rd visit and spent the following days determining whether I was a problem or an asset. He had decided I was an asset. But standing in that hallway, I didn't know any of that. What I knew was that a man I had never seen before had just told me there was someone waiting to intercept me in the parking structure, and that I had roughly 17 minutes to decide whether to trust him. I thought about my father walking to his car on a Tuesday morning. "How do I get out?" I said. "Service elevator to the kitchen level. Exit through the loading dock on Huron Street. There's a gray Honda Civic parked at the meter. Leave the recorder under the front passenger seat and walk away from it. I'll retrieve it within the hour. Text your contact at the U.S. Attorney's office. Just the word confirmed. She'll know what to do." "How do you know about Helen?" "Because she almost hired me first," he said. "But I had a prior conflict of interest. She found you instead." Something in the way he said it, no performance in it, no selling, made me believe him. Or maybe I just needed to, and I was making peace with that fact in real time. Either way, I moved. The service elevator smelled like dish soap and industrial cleaner. I stood in it with the linen cart and my recorder and my 4 months of careful, quiet work, and I thought about the word confirmed, and what it would mean if I was wrong about him, and what it would mean if I was right. The loading dock was cold. March in Chicago is its own specific misery. That wet wind off the lake that gets into your bones before you've taken 3 steps. The Civic was exactly where he'd said. I crouched down beside the passenger side, slid the recorder under the seat, and stood up like I was checking my phone for a rideshare. I texted Helen 1 word. Then I walked 4 blocks north, went into a Walgreens, bought a bottle of water I didn't need, and stood in the vitamin aisle for 22 minutes until my heart rate dropped to something I recognized. What happened next took another 6 weeks, and I was not the one who made it happen. That's important to say. I did my piece. The recorder, the shorthand notes, 4 months of documented surveillance submitted through proper channels, an affidavit that Helen filed under seal. Daniel had his own materials, his 2 years of parallel work, a source inside the Harmon logistics operation who had been waiting for the right moment to become useful. The federal prosecutor's office in the Northern District of Illinois convened a grand jury in mid-April. I know this because Helen told me. I know because I read the Chicago Tribune on a Saturday morning in May and saw Raymond Calloway's name below the fold, and sat with that for a long time before I could finish my coffee. The indictment included 17 counts: wire fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, bribery of a public official, which, when the public official in question is a federal judge, carries implications that ripple through every case he'd ever touched. The Miriam situation turned out to be a woman named Miriam Okafor, a paralegal who had discovered the same financial patterns my father had discovered and reported them to Calloway's court directly, not knowing he was the one she should have feared. She had moved to Phoenix 18 months ago. She was found. She was contacted by federal investigators. She was alive. She agreed to cooperate. Conrad Webb entered into a plea agreement in early June. I drove to my parents' house on a Sunday in July. My mother was in the backyard with her tomatoes. She's always had tomatoes. Every summer, even the summers, when things were hardest, like tending the garden was the one thing she could control when everything else had come loose. I sat on the back porch and watched her work, and I didn't tell her everything. I may never tell her everything, but I told her that some people who had hurt Dad were being held responsible now. That the things he'd reported, the things he'd tried to do, had mattered. That it had taken longer than it should have, and that wasn't fair. But it was true. She didn't say anything for a moment. She was crouching beside the tomato stakes, not looking at me. Then she said, "He always believed it would come out eventually. He said systems fail, but truth doesn't disappear." I had to look away. At the fence. At the neighbor's maple tree. At anywhere that wasn't my mother's face, because I was not going to cry in her backyard on a Sunday afternoon and worry her more than she already had been worried. I said, "He was right." She nodded once and went back to her tomatoes. Daniel and I met for coffee twice after the indictment. He was careful and a little formal, the way people are when they've been operating alone for a long time and proximity to another person still feels like a variable to manage. I understood that. I'm not unlike that myself. We talked about the case in the abstract, about what would happen next, about the particular exhaustion of doing work that cannot be acknowledged in any normal way. On the second visit, he said, "I'm sorry about your father. I found out about him when I was researching you. I should have said that earlier. I said it was fine. It wasn't fine. But it was the truth I had now, and I had learned that those two things could coexist." "What do you do next?" he asked. I thought about it. The honest answer was that I didn't know yet. The case that had quietly organized 4 years of my life was no longer my case. Helen had the materials. The federal system had the defendants. I was a private investigator who had done exactly what I was hired to do and had been paid accordingly. And now there was an absence where the purpose used to be. "I have another client," I said, which was true. A missing person case in Evanston. A family looking for a grandmother with early-stage dementia who had wandered in February and not come home. Entirely different world. Quiet work. The kind where success means someone gets to go back to their life. "Good," he said. He meant it. You can tell. I drove home with the windows down even though it was only 50 degrees, because the cold air felt clarifying in a way I needed. The city looked the same as it always does. The same traffic on the 290. The same buildings stacking up against the same sky. But I had the particular feeling of having put something down that I'd been carrying for a long time, and not knowing yet how to walk without the weight of it. My father had trusted that the truth wouldn't disappear. He had been right. It had just needed someone patient enough to wait with it. The grandmother in Evanston was found 3 days later, staying with a former neighbor she'd known for 40 years. Perfectly safe. Perfectly confused about what all the fuss was about. I sat in my car outside the family's house after I made the call, listening to the mother on the other end of the phone cry with relief. And I thought, this is why you do the work. Not the big cases, not the ones that make the papers. This. The moment when something lost comes back to the people who needed it. I started the car. I had notes to file, invoices to send, coffee to make. The city kept moving. I kept moving with it.